רבה ואמרו כולם מי כמוך באלים אדוני מי כמוך נהדר בקודש נורא תהילות אוסף אלה שירה חדשה שיבחו גאולים לשמך שפת הים יחכו למודבים לכו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ינאי נאי ינאי נאי ינאי נאי ינאי צור ישראל קומה בעזרת ישראל ובטחנו ממך יהודה וישראל גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו קדוש ישראל ברוך אתה אדוני קהל ישראל. If you have not yet finished your Amidah, please continue at your own pace. We will continue with the Torah service. And before Rabbi Shapiro introduces the Torah service and does whatever he wishes. I want to just mention, because I haven't been able to mention this in a while, that in a moment, Marshall will say the blessing, La'asok b'divrei Torah. And as he and I were going back and forth in emails about which verses, and as many of you know, Marshall beautifully, with the help of Rabbi Perry Netter's kind of installation of this type of idea, created a triennial specific for Beitenu, which has brought a lot of learning and a lot of intentionality to the Torah service, which is a beautiful thing. So Marshall and I were going back and forth on the verses and maftir or no maftir and going back and forth. And it struck me that, Marshall, you are the embodiment of the blessing La'asok b'divrei Torah. You are a person who truly busies yourself, creates a business for yourself around Torah. And it is such, and Larry Herman is nodding, which means that it is a true thing, because if Larry Herman agrees, we know that it's accurate. So, Marshall, I just want to say that I am forever grateful to you always in terms of that what you do to La'asok b'divrei Torah. But before you read the Torah for us today, I just wanted to mention how special it is that even when we are not all together, you are still taking it upon yourself to busy yourself with the words of Torah, to bring intentionality to the words that we say, and to make sure that we are all still connected through the learning that we do from our Torah. So thank you, and Yashar Koach in advance. And Rabbi Shapiro.
Yes, Rabbi Schatz.
It's over to you.
Oh, it's over to me. Far be it from me to stomp on such a lovely introduction by then distracting us away from that. I will say that, as Rabbi Schatz had a couple of weeks ago, I had the benefit just now of not just jumping jacks, but a two-person clergy dance party happening just out of your sight line. So Rabbis Kligfeld and Jorny finish up the bar mitzvah on the field and came by to say hello. They share their dance moves vicariously with all of you, I'm sure. What a parsha, right, Rabbi Schatz?
What a parsha.
What a parsha. This is a parsha. This parsha is rated a hard R, as they say in showbiz. There's a lot of stuff going on in here. Really, I will say it like this: a wide-ranging parsha in terms of what it addresses. And one of the things, if not the things that is most well known for, is that it is a parsha that contains the highest number of mitzvot. And I recently read a piece, courtesy not of the Rabbi Chorny, who was just in here, but apparently Rabbi Daniel Chorny has been reading recently some works by Jose Faur, and I read an article that he wrote. I'm going to share a piece with you that I really liked about the end, from the end of the article. I will probably end up using it elsewhere. It's too good of a piece to only use once, but I'll share it with you guys for the first time here now. Faur says this about mitzvot. He says, formally, the Torah is a highly complex system. It contains 613 mitzvot. Unlike stratas of opportunities from earlier in the article, they cannot be fulfilled by a single individual. Indeed, the Torah was given to Klal Yisrael, the totality of Israel, because the Torah as a total system can only be fulfilled collectively. We should, in the language of the Tanakh, serve God with a single shoulder. There are several consequences to this view, since it is not possible for a single individual to fulfill the Torah in its entirety. If one had fulfilled a single commandment, a single mitzvah, she or he has participated in the Brit and is therefore religious, no matter whether that mitzvah is honoring one's parents or sending the bird away before taking her nestling, just in this week's parsha, etc. The diversity of commandments is so great and the opportunities so many that it would be difficult to find a single Jew who in the course of his or her life has not fulfilled at least one of the mitzvot of the Brit. I love this idea. I'm really quite taken by it. I, for some time, have wrestled with what can feel like the onerous number of 613, right? The 613 commandments is a lot of commandments. And the challenge of feeling like if I am not nailing it on each and every single one of them, then it can feel like I am sort of falling short. And there is a religious impulse that is valuable in feeling like falling short, because then I can consistently aspire to do better and better. And it can also be a little defeating, right? And I love the Faurian flip here, as it were, that since there are so many mitzvot, I've done at least one, right? Everybody in this Zoom right now, everybody who might be watching this on a stream on Shabbat, after Shabbat, whatever it might be, we've all done at least one, and we all have the obligation to contribute anything and everything and anything that we can towards the larger totality of the fulfillment of the Torah in the world. So on a Shabbat morning, in which we hear about so many mitzvot, which another way of thinking about that I've heard before is a Hasidic read of mitzvah, not as commandment, but as an opportunity for connection, right? That playing with Aramaic, that it's an opportunity for connection. There are so many opportunities for connection. There are so many commandments out there. It'll be difficult to find a person who has not fulfilled at least one of the mitzvot of the totality of our covenant with God. So as we move into this week's parsha, I hope maybe we can each reflect on what are the mitzvot that we have been blessed to be able to fulfill this past week, and what might be one that we may yet fulfill moving forward. I will echo and amplify Rabbi Schatz's praise and honor of Marshall Kramer as someone who fully busies himself of the work of Torah. Marshall, we know, has done far more than one. I'm trying to find one that I've done. Marshall's done far more than one, and his zeal and his passion for Torah and mitzvot is certainly something that I have seen and experienced. And as someone who formerly held the office that Rabbi Schatz is now in, grateful for Marshall's diligence in all things Beitenu Torah related. So I will turn. Well,
you still have the same office, actually.
It was a figurative term, Rabbi.
I wanted to remind you, since we're at home, it's hard to remember, so I wanted to remind you.
Thank you. It is a nice physical office that I have when I'm not in a pandemic. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah, no problem.
Yours has some nice exposed brick, which I do not have.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, very good. I was saying nice things about Marshall. So thank you to Marshall for anything and everything that you do, and it is ample for our community. And one of those things is going to be chanting Torah for us this morning. So we are still in the middle of the first triennial cycle. We're going to begin at the beginning of the Parsha. Parshat Ki Tetzei. If you have an Eitz Chaim Chumash, you can find it on page 1112. That is chapter 21, verse 10. I will turn it over to Marshall to begin chanting this week's Parsha.
Thank you, Rabbi Schatz and Rabbi Shapiro, for your very kind words. I'll start with the bracha before our study of Torah. If you want to follow it in the Siddur Lev Shalem, it's found on page 107. And I'll recite it both in the English and in the Hebrew. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai, our God, sovereign of time and space, who has provided us with a path to holiness through the observance of mitzvot, and has instructed us to engage with the words of Torah.
Amen.
First Aliyah. Ki tetzei lamilchama al oyevecha untano Adonai Elohecha biyadecha v'shavita shivyo v'ra'ita b'shivya eshet yifatoar v'chashaktava v'lakachta lecha leisha V'haveta el toch beitecha, v'gilecha et rosha, v'aseta et ziporneha, v'hesira et simlat shivya me'aleha, v'yashiva b'veitecha uvachetaha, et aviha v'et ima yerach yamim, v'yachar kein tavo eleha uvalta, v'hayata lecha leisha, v'haya imlo chafatzta ba, v'shilachta lenasha, umachor lo timkarena bakasef, lo titamer ba, tachat asher inita. That which would be the second aliyah. Ki tiyena leish shtei nashim, ha'achat ahuva v'achat snua, v'yaladu v'vanim, ha'ahuva v'hasnua, v'haya haben habechor lasniya, v'haya Biyom hanchilo et panav et ashielo lo yuchal levaker et ben ha'ahuva ha'panei ven hasanua habechor ki et habechor ben hasanua yakir latet lo pishanayim bechol ashimatzei lo Ki hu reshit ono lo mishpat habechorah. That which would be the third aliyah. Ki eleish bein sorer umoreh einenu shomea bekol aviv uvkol imo v'yisaru oto v'lo yishma alehem v'tafsuvo aviv imo v'hotziu oto el ziknei iro v'el shar mekomo v'yameru el ziknei iro b'neinu ze sorer umoreh einenu shomea b'kolenu zolel v'sovei urgamu Kol anshe iro v'avanim v'amet uviar tahara mikirbecha v'chol Yisrael yishma'u v'yira'u. That which would be the fourth aliyah. Ki v'ish chet mishpat mavet v'humat v'talita oto al eitz Lo talini vlato al ha'etz, ki kavor tikberenu bayom hahu, ki kilalat Elohim ta'alui, v'lo titame et admatecha, asher Adonai Elohecha, noten lecha nachala, lo tire et shor achicha, o et seyo nidachim, Vitalam tamehem, hashev tishivem achicha, vim lo karov achicha elecha v'lo yedato, va'asafto el toch beitecha, v'haya imecha, ad derosh achicha oto, v'hashev oto lo. V'chein ta'aseh lachamoro, v'chein ta'aseh lesimlato, v'chein ta'aseh l'chol avedat achicha, asher tovad mimenu umsata, lo tuchalit alehem, lo tireh, Et chamor achicha o shoro nofalim baderech vitalam tamehem hakem takim imo lo yech li gever al isha lo yubash gever simlat isha Ki toavat Adonai Elohecha kol osei ele, ki yikare kansipor lefanecha b'haderech b'chol eitz o al haaretz efrochim ovetzim v'ha'em rovetzet al ha'efrochim o al ha'beitzim lo tikach ha'em al habanim Shalech tishalach et ha'em v'et habanim tikach lach lema'an yitav lach v'arachta yamim.
Pause as Marshall moves through the reading. We'll pause for Misha Berach, a prayer for those in our community who are in need of healing. As I go through the names, I encourage you to hold for yourselves those who you know who are in need of healing who might not be on this list. I encourage you to keep in your hearts those who you love, who you are thinking about, who you are sending prayers of healing to or continued wellness to, as we take a moment to reflect on those in our community who are sick. Mishaberach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov v'Imotenu Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah hu yivarech v'yirapeh et Zehava Yafa bat Esther ve'et Nima bat Malka ve'et Leah bat Esther ve'et Desiree Leah ve'et Irma Kuriel ve'et Yehudit bat Frima ve'et Rivka bat Pesha ve'et Arna Rela bat Yehudit ve'et Mordechai ben Esther ve'et Leah Friedel bat Bracha Crandall ve'et Catherine bat Sarah ve'et Stanley Greitzer Vet Leah bat Freya, vet Harav Yaakov Baruch ben Uri v'Chava, vet Zahava Yafa bat Esther, vet Yosef Menachem Mendel ben Gittel, vet Yehuda ben Avraham v'Sara, vet Chasha Chaya bat Sarah, vet Friedel bat Rachel, vet Gutman Wolf ben Fruma Gutta, vet Menachem ben Chaim, vet Akiva ben Naphtali umalka, vet Shoshana bat Leah, vet Chana bat Esther, vet Nikatzina bat Fruma Tova, Metuka Sarah bat Shindel Golda, Vet Bela Esther Gittel bat Fega, Vet Ben Tzion ben Gittel, Vet Chaya bat Sarah vet Yaakov ben Avraham, Vet Yoel Ari ben Esther, Vet Helene bat Sarah, Vet Tova bat Yosef Achava, Vet Elad Shoshan, Vet Eliyahu ben Shenas Shira, Vet Shmuel Chaim ben Dvora, Vet Yita bat Mordechai Lev Malka, Vet Yelena Kramer, Vet Reuven ben Binyamin, Vet Yehudit bat Li bat Sivia, Vet Yitzchak Yaakov ben Paya, Vet Yisrael ben Alfrida, Vet Aharon Avram ben Adina, Vet Yosef ben Yeta, Vet Rivka bat Nechama, Vet Harav Pinchas ben Ruth, Vet Frida bat Esther, Vet Shlomo, Vet Moshe ben Chana, Vet Avraham, Vet Shmuel Mordechai ben Tova, Vet Eliyahu Chaim, Vet Jenny Ashkenazi, Vet Dorit Ashkenazi, Vet Shalom Ashkenazi, Vet Mia Abramov, Vet Michelle Abramov, Vet Yosef ben Dvasha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yemel Rachamim Alehem Lachzikam Ularapotam Yishlach Lahem Refuah Shlema Min Hashamayim Refuat HaNefesh Urefuat HaGuf Betoch Shar Cholim V'chazek Et Yedei Oskim B'tzarchehem Shabbat Hi Milizuk Urefuah Korva Lavo Hashta Bagalav Izman Kariv V'nomar Amen. One more note, just also a moment to reflect on gratitude for all those in our community who are continuing to care for those who are ill. This continues to be a time in which there is certainly an amplified healthcare need in our community. With I was talking with someone yesterday, just reflecting on how she's a doctor, how she had been called upon to go into COVID testing sites. She has a child. She had not been expecting that. This was months ago now, but just yesterday, reflecting on the continued stress on our system and stress on healthcare workers being thrust into all sorts of situations that they never really could have anticipated, and just continued gratitude for all the work that our healthcare workers are doing, and continued prayers for their safety and as they continue to supply care to all those who are in need. We will continue. Marshall will continue reading for us what would be the fifth Aliyah, chapter 22, verse 8. It's in the middle of the page on 1117 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash. chapter 22, verse 8 in Deuteronomy. Marshall, back over to you.
כי תבנה בית חדש ועשית מעקה לגגך ולא תשים דמים בביתך כי פול הנופל ממנו לא תזרע כרמך כלאיים פן תקדש המלאה הזרע אשר תזרע ותבואת הכרם לא תחרוש בשור ובחמור יחדיו לא תלבש שעטנז זמר ופשתים יחדיו גדילים תעשה לך על ארבע כנפות כסותך אשר תכסה בה. That which would be the sixth aliyah. כי כך איש אישה ובא אליה ושניה ושם לה עלילות דברים והוציא עליה שם רע ואמר את האישה הזאת לקחתי ואקרב אליה ומצאתי לה בתולים ולקח אבי הנערה ואימה והוציאו את בתולי הנערה אל זקני העיר השערה ואמר אבי הנערה אל הזקנים את ביתי נתתי לאיש הזה לאישה וישנאה והנה הוא שם עלילות דברים לאמור לא מצאתי לביתך בתולים ואלה בתולי ביתי ופרסו את השמלה לפני זקני העיר ולקחו זקני העיר ההיא את האיש ויסרו אותו ויענשו אותו 100 כסף ונתנו לאבי הנערה כי הוציא שם רע על בתולת ישראל לא יהיה לאישה לא יוכל לשלחה כל ימיו ואם אמת היה הדבר הזה לא נמצאו בתולים לנערה והוציאו את הנערה אל פתח בית אביה וזכלוה אנשי עירה באבנים ומתה כי עשתה נבלה בישראל לזנות בית אביה וביארתה הרע מקרבך כי מצא איש שוכב עם אישה ועולת בעל ומתו גם שניהם האיש השוכב עם האישה והאישה וביארתה הרע מישראל כי יהיה נערה בתולה מאורסה לאיש ומצאה איש בעיר ושחט עמה והוצאתם את שניהם אל שער העיר ההיא וזכלתם אותם באבנים ומתו את הנערה על דבר אשר לא צעקה בעיר ואת האיש על דבר אשר עינה את אשת רעהו וביארתה הרע מקרבך ואם בשדה ימצא האיש את הנערה המאורסה והחזיק בה האיש ושכב עמה ומת האיש אשר שכב עמה לבדו ולנערה לא תעשה דבר אין לנערה חטא מוות כי כאשר יקום איש על רעהו ורצחו נפש כן הדבר הזה Kiva Sade Mitsa'a Sa'aka Hanara Hameorasa V'ein Moshiala Kim Sa'ish Na'ara Vetula Asher Lo Orasa Utfasa V'shachab Ima V'nimsa'u V'natan Ha'ish Hashochev Ima La'avi Hanara Chamishim Kasef Lo Tieh Li'isha Tachat Asher Ina Lo Yuchal Shalacha Kol Yamav. That which would be the seventh Aliyah. Lo Yikach Ishet Eshet Aviv, Lo Yigale Kenaf Aviv, Lo Yavo Fitzuadaka, Uchru Shofcha Bikal Adonai, Lo Yavo Mamzer Bikal Adonai, Gam Dor Asiri, Lo Yavo Lo Bikal Adonai, Lo Yavo Amoni, Umo Avi Bikal Adonai, Gam Dor Asiri, Lo Yavo Lahem Bikal Adonai Ad Olam, Al Devar Asher Lo Kidemu Etchem Balechem Uvamayim, Baderek Betzetechem Imitzrayim, Va'asher Sachar Alecha Et Bilam Ben Beor Mipetor Avram Naharayim Lekalalecha V'lo Ava Adonai Elohecha Lishmoa El Bilam V'yafoch Adonai Elohecha Lecha Et Haklala Livracha Ki Ahevecha Adonai Elohecha Lo tidro shalomam v'tovotam kol yamecha leolam.
Yasher Koach, Marshall, thank you so much for reading for us this morning. We're grateful to, even though we can't all be in Pilch together, very grateful to still have you chanting for us and being of service to our community in that way. So Yasher Koach, thank you so much for reading. I'm going to turn it over to Rick in just 1 second for the Haftarah. I'll just hold up. It's a beautiful Haftarah. Again, we are now in the 5th Haftarah of consolation, which just means 3 shopping weeks left until Rosh Hashanah. Rabbi Schatz is very excited, as you can see. She's very excited, as am I. Oh, Brant's very excited for all of the wonderful things we have in store for Rosh Hashanah, but it's Shabbos. We're not going to worry about that right now. So we're in our 5th Haftarah of consolation, and it ends beautifully. Chasdi mi'itcha lo yamush. My loving kindness will never leave you. Uvrit shlomi lo tamut. My covenant of, it says friendship, my covenant of peace will never be shaken. That through it all, we have this covenant with God that does not go away, which in times of challenge, I think is important to remind ourselves of, that we do have the blessing of this covenant. And then there's a question of how do we sustain that covenant? How do we feel that covenant? And we're told through action, right? Through these mitzvot, which are enumerated at length in this parasha, some of which may feel a little organic to our everyday lives and others. But hey, as we heard from Faur before the Torah reading, we're not necessarily going to be checking off a box on each one of the 613, right? That there are always going to be mitzvot that are sort of out of what we do in our everyday lives, or even the course of our entire lives. And there's always, each day, at least one mitzvah that we can fulfill to the fullest. And that's how we stay connected to the covenant that we hear about in the conclusion of the Haftarah this morning. So I'm going to turn it over to Rick. It's out of chapter 54 of Isaiah, in the Eitz Chaim Chumash. It's on page 1138, 1138. And if you're following along elsewhere, fifth Haftarah of Consolation, beginning of chapter 54 of Isaiah. Over to you, Rick. Vakasha.
Thank you, Rabbi. Hello. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Roni akara lo yalada pitzchirina v'tzahali lo chala ki rabim b'nei shomema mibnei ve'ula amar Adonai harchivi mekom oholech viriot mishkanotayich yatu al tachsochi ha'arichi metarayich v'tedotayich chazeki ki yamin u'smol tifrotzi v'zar'ech goyim yirash ve'arim neshamot yoshivu al tir'i ki lo tevoshi ve'al tikami ki lo tachbiri ki voshet alumayich tishkachi v'cherpat amanutayich lo tizkari od ki vo alayich osayich Adonai tzvaot shemo v'goalech kedosh Yisrael Elohei chol haaretz yikareh ki chisha azuva vatsuvat ruach kerach Adonai ve'eshet nurim ki timaes amar Elohayich berega katon azavtich uvrachamim gedolim akabtzech beshetzef ketzef histarti fanarega mimech uvechesed olam richamtich amar goalech Adonai ki me Noach zot li asher nishpati me'avor me Noach od al haaretz kein nishpati mikzof alayich umik orbach ki heharim yamushu vehagvaot tmutena v'chasti meitech lo yamush uvrich shlomi lo tamut amar merachamech Adonai.
Rabbi
Back to
Shapiro,
you.
you're muted.
Oh,
There you are.
see, it happens to me even when I'm not the one muting myself, Rabbi Schatz. What are you going to do?
Just
I
for-
think I'm being sent a message from the world that I find myself muted more often than I would like to be. What do you think? Is that a message?
I think Yasher Koach to Rick Muller.
I think Yasher Koach to Rick Muller as well. Thank you for chanting for us, Rick. Rabbi Schatz, do you want to run the Prayers for Country, Israel, and Peace train?
Sure. Yeah.
Because I had a different idea, but I don't want to mess with your
No,
idea.
I had no idea. So let's
You
go.
have no ideas. Rabbi Schatz, you are full of ideas. I know right now you're thinking of at least 6 different program series that will be able to start immediately after Simchat Torah.
Okay.
Okay. So here's what I'm thinking. I find the Prayers for Country, Israel, and Peace can get a little rote, personally. So I think we're gonna mix it up a little bit this morning. That's my thought. Okay. So In lieu of reading through the prayer for our country in English, we're gonna do sort of a reflective moment with each three of these things. In lieu of the prayer for our country, which if you would like to read quietly to yourself in English, you are of course welcome to. By all means, I would not want to stop you from doing that if you find that to be meaningful. Or you can take a moment, as I'm going to do, and think of two things. Think first of something about our country for which you are grateful, and reflect on how in this week to come you are going to work to enhance and expand and grow that. And think about something within our country that you think could be better, could be fixed, could have some sort of tikkun, some sort of fixing, some sort of enhancement, a growing edge, as you might say. And think about how this week you might work to bring that change about. So something in our country that you are grateful for and how you're going to sustain that, and something in our country that you would like to fix and how you would go about doing that. We'll reflect for a minute. Okay. You're welcome to keep reflecting on that if you would like. We'll now turn our attention in the same sort of framing to the prayer for the state of Israel. If you would like to read the prayer for the state of Israel in the Hebrew, in the English, by all means do so. I'll also invite you, if you would like, to think about something about Israel for which you are deeply grateful, overjoyed about, really love and adore, to think of that for yourself and to think about how you are going to stay connected to that and work to sustain that this week. And if you're able to think of something about Israel that you wish was a little bit different, that you would maybe adjust, that you, as I said, consider to be a growing edge, something that in your ideal conception of what the state of Israel looks like would look a little bit different, and to think about how you might take action towards that this week. So something that you're grateful about regarding the state of Israel, and something that in your ideal world might look a little bit different. Take a moment to reflect. If you'd like to keep reflecting on that, I invite you to. We'll do this once more. Usually we would now responsively read the prayer for peace, and though Rabbi Schatz and I still could certainly work on our responsive reading skills, I think we'll hold off on that work for just this week. Peace, of course, can also, in the Hebrew, peace is shalom, which is, of course, connected to the word shalem for wholeness. So we'll bring this in internally a little bit, because we are blessed, right, that there are other prayers over the course of our services that reflect on the need for peace in the world. So I'll invite you, if you'd like to read the prayer for peace written in the Siddur on page 178, you are welcome to. I'll also invite you to take one more moment. Where is a place within yourself that you are currently feeling some wholeness? You are feeling whole and complete. And how can you sustain that? And where might be a place within yourself where you are not yet complete, where there is some lack, where there is something that needs some sort of spiritual sustenance, as it were? And what might you do to address that lack over the course of this Shabbat and this week? We'll take one more moment to reflect on that, and then we'll move forward. May we be blessed that all the things for which we are grateful and the ways we are whole, ways in which we are whole, sustain themselves today and long into the future. And may we all find the strength and resiliency and courage to address all the things that need adjustment and enhancement and growth together. And we say, Amen.
Amen.
Rabbi Schatz, we could do Ashrei responsively. That would be fun.
Larry got very excited about that. So I think, wow. Yes, let's do it. Let's do Ashrei because I appreciate when Larry Herman gets excited about things.
Great.
Like that. But let's do this tune. I'm gonna do a tune and you can repeat after me. How's that sound?
Oh, that sounds like an adventure.
Okay. Ashrei Ashrei ve'techa oni halelucha sela Ashrei.
Ashrei ha'am shekach halo Ashrei ha'am shadonai Elohav.
Tehila leDavid armi mechalo hayam melech v'avachashim chalalam va'ed.
Bechol yom avarcheka v'al hashimcha le'olam va'ed.
Adol Adonai mehulam me'od ve'ligdulato ein cheker.
Dor ledor yishabach ma'asecha u'gvuratecha yagidu.
Adakevod hodecha v'divrei niflotecha sicha.
Bezuz noratecha yomeru ugdulatecha asaprena.
Zecher rav tuvcha yaviu v'tzidkadcha hay. No. Tzidkadcha yiranenu.
There you go. Chanun v'rachum Adonai erech apayim ugdal chesed.
Av Adonai lakom v'rachem v'alkom azav.
Yoduch Adonai kol ma'asecha v'chasidecha yevarchucha.
Od malchutcha yomeru gvuratecha yedaberu.
Leodia livnei ha'adam givurotav u'chvod hadar malchuto.
Malchutecha malchut kol halavim v'meshaltecha v'chol dor v'ador.
Somech Adonai lechol hanoflim v'zokef lechol ha'kefufim.
Einei chol elecha yesaberu v'tanat lahem adoch lahem behito.
Poteach et yadecha u'maspia lechol charatzon.
Tzadik Adonai v'chol deracha v'chasid b'chol masav.
Karov Adonai lechol korav lechol asher yikaruhu ve'emet.
Ratzon yirahav yaseh v'et shavatam mishma v'yoshihem.
Shomer Adonai et kol ohavav ve'et kol ha'reshayim yashmid.
Tehilat Adonai yedaber pi v'yivarech kol basar shem kol shalom v'ahed.
V'anachnu nevarech yamei ata ve'ad olam hallelujah. Yasher koach.
For you.
Ah, very good. You know what, Rabbi Schatz? That's the tune that I learned to Shir HaKavod.
Yeah, I know. I was about to make a joke that I was never a young little boy who did that in shul, which is why I messed up the line at one point.
Well, maybe you've inspired me to lead Shir HaKavod when we end services today, which will be very exciting.
I hope that that's not the case, but yeah, maybe. Okay. All right. Though Rabbi Kligfeld and I have a joke, and then we can actually move on in our service. Rabbi Kligfeld and I have a joke that when I was an intern, for some reason, every time he and I led services, we ended like 20 minutes early. And we never really knew why. It's not like we started early or anything like that. But for some reason, we always ended very early. So when I was an intern, every single time we led services together, we did Anim Smirot, which I, again, had never led before in my life. But now, since I've become a rabbi, we have never ended 20 minutes early. So think that what you may. Rabbi Shapiro, you're going to kick it off, but I just want to give a shout out to one person who is on here who is making me very happy to see him. Larry Brayman, it is just wonderful to see you, and putting together the high holidays and not being able to meet with you and see you, having you here this morning really brings a lot of joy to me and reminds me that there is a lot more work to do for the high holidays. So it's really, really nice to see you. And Rabbi Shapiro, over to you.
we're going to do something a little bit different this morning that Rabbi Schatz is anxious about, but I'm very excited about. So, right, Rabbi Schatz? Yeah, okay.
No.
Okay, very good. In the name of collaboration and playing around with this format a little bit, rather than just having one or the other of us give a straightforward drash, we're going to conversate a little bit back and forth in an open-ended and non-clearly defined way, which does not give me any anxiety whatsoever. Right, Rabbi Schatz?
You should just start.
Okay, very good.
Okay.
Some of you might have heard me share this experience before, but it was unusual and very resonant with me. So it lingers for me, and if you've heard me share about it before, forgive the repetition. There was this experience I had shortly after Eliav was born. He's turning 6 in November. That sounds very old. My 5.5-year-old, we'll stick with 5.5. My 5.5-year-old was born. It was shortly after I had gone back to work, and I was driving into work one day. And I had this odd, like, sort of flash as I was driving, that all of a sudden the people who were driving their cars were no longer the adults that they were in that moment driving their cars. They were instead each one of them like this little newborn baby in need of love and care, and sustenance and warmth, right? Like spending time with my son, who was then a very, very small baby, sort of like brought me in touch with the inherent innocence and newness and sweetness and holiness that each new life brings into the world. And it sort of struck me that, yes, we are adults, we go about our lives, we make mistakes, we slip, we stumble, we fall. And at our core, each one of us is still the unique and pure and holy creation that we were when we came into the world. And wherever our paths have taken us along the way, we still each are today. Lahavdil, right, on the complete other end of the spectrum, as we were going through this parsha, which, as Rabbi Schatz and I were bantering about earlier, not all of the verses in this week's parsha are the most easily drashable, and we'll leave it at that. But there's these verses in chapter 21, verses 22 and 23, talking about when things have gone horribly wrong, when things have really fallen apart and gone about as badly as they can for a person. If someone commits an offense for which they are put to death, right? We know as we go through the corpus of rabbinic literature that the death penalty is something that gets very much legislated out of normative Jewish thought and practice. But in the Torah, it's something that is very much in sort of the lingua franca. It's very much something that is a concept that's worked with. If someone is put to death and he's placed on a stake, he's literally hanging, you shouldn't leave his body out overnight. You need to bury him that same day. Ki klalat Elohim talui, for that impaled body is an affront to God. Even though this person has done something in the category of the worst things that they can possibly do, you still shouldn't leave their body out overnight. There is still something about that body, about that person, about the image of that person, whatever it might be. And Rabbi Schatz and I are going to go back and forth on that a little bit. You shouldn't leave that body out overnight. What comes to mind here for me is that there's this Mishnah rather in Sanhedrin that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, have come across, that God, one of the things that is amazing about God is that when humans make coins and they are stamped, all the coins come out the same. But when God creates each person in the image of God, as we each are, every person comes out differently. right? Every single person is different. We're all created in the image of God, yet we're all different. But then inverting that, we each still contain, and this is going back to the experience I had, we each still contain within us that holy spark, that divine image, that element of God. No matter how much things have gone awry, no matter how bad things have gotten, we each still contain that holy spark within us. But my question, Rabbi Schatz, is how do we remember that before things go so bad, right? How do I, as I'm going about my day, not having recently had a baby, we don't have a 2-year-old, not recently having had any babies, right? And before things go so far right, how do I remember the essential holiness of each person I'm interacting with when I might be getting frustrated, distracted, a little bit cranky, right? How do I not lose sight of the essential holiness of each person as I go about my day? I know Rabbi Schatz has the answers.
So I want to take a few steps back to then answer this question. When we're learning about the writing of the Torah, if you are someone who can just go with me for 1 second and talk about the documentary hypothesis, there are different names for God used in the different situations that we find God in. So for example, in Genesis, in Breshit, the beginning of Breshit, and for, I would say the majority, though I haven't done the actual math, we see the name Elohim used for God more so than, for example, Adonai. So that God, the Elohist is what it's called in the documentary hypothesis. The Elohim God is seen as the creation God, the relational God, the God that is with us when the world is created, and the God that is with us when Joseph is dealing with his brothers, the God that is with Adam and Eve in the garden, the God that is part of our daily life in a relational and maybe in an anthropomorphized way, right? That is the God that is referred to as Elohim. Adonai is the God that is very often referred to in situations of law or situations of practice or situations of discipline. So that Adonai is more what you might call powerful or king-like God. And those texts are called the Yahwist texts because of Adonai. If you were to say that out in English, you would maybe get the sounds Yahweh. So I want us for a second, think about the Shema, a line that you all know, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu. Both of those names of God are in there. And Rabbi Schulweis says a beautiful thing. Rabbi Harold Schulweis, some of you may have known, he was one of the rabbis at VBS, a really beautiful soul and someone who just impacted Judaism in an incredible way. What Rabbi Schulweis says about this idea of Adonai and Elohim is that, and I'm going to read it so we can hear his words, the world was created incomplete, full of given potentialities that require human actualization. Divinity is both real and ideal. And when we recite the Shema, we pray that Elohim and Adonai shall become one. The aim of Echad is to unify the world of is and the world of ought, a unification that sanctifies the name of God. In this verse that Rabbi Shapiro just read, the phrase Kilelat Elohim Talui is referring back to that creation, that relational God. In a moment of law, which is not what we would expect. We would expect Adonai. And we do see Adonai later on in the phrase. But Sforno picks up on this. Sforno picks up on the use of Elohim in this phrase, and he says, every creature is known as Elohim, even in this case, a disembodied creature. This includes the soul of human beings being known as Selem Elohim, in the image of God. Seeing that the disgrace done to a person after he has died is also an insult to this disembodied essence of the person, the Torah describes it as kilalat Elohim, equivalent to cursing the dead person's eternal essence. Kilalat Elohim, leaving the dead corpse hanging without burial, is an insult to that very eternal essence of a human being called Elohim. So there's something that Sforno is picking up on here, that this person who is being left out for us to take care of eventually, but unfortunately not in the moment, that we are actually seeing that as a stab against Elohim, against the Creator, against this relational God. And one step further he goes, therefore, against all creation of God. Because if that person is Betselem Elohim, if that person is created in the image of this creation, this relational God, then you are cursing those who are made in the image of God by putting him on a stake and not recognizing that that person who you have left there is in fact God, is in fact an embodiment of God. So in a moment, Rabbi Shapiro is going to talk to us a little bit about this idea of where we stand in the world, right? Who we are, what we're supposed to see ourselves as to move forward as in the image of God, B'Tselem Elohim. But I want you to think about this idea that the Torah specifically used Elohim in this line rather than Adonai to bring us back to the soulfulness of this moment rather than just the lawfulness of this moment. It's supposed to speak to our heart, not necessarily to our justice. Shapiro.
Thank you. Yes, shots. I love that. I love playing with the seeing what the names of God represent. It's also striking that you bring in Rabbi Schulweis, because in thinking about what you just shared about Sforno and the image of God, I know Sforno read the Mishnah. I'm guessing Sforno knew Mishnah quite a ways better than I did. It's interesting the way you're offering him up, because it also, from what I was looking at, doesn't seem necessarily to be absolute, right? The Mishnah talks about how if you leave the body, you shouldn't leave the body hanging overnight, but if you leave it hanging overnight for the sake of getting a coffin, bringing a shroud, right, something that is necessary for the burial preparations, you actually can leave it hanging over the night so that the body can be treated basically appropriately and respectfully. So it's interesting to me as well that it's not an absolutist statement, at least according to the Mishnah, right? That there are conditions. Upon conditions, there are principles underneath the principle, right? The principle of kavod hamet, the principle of being respectful to the dead, manifests itself in different ways, which makes me think as well about this idea that ties in very much with Rabbi Schulweis's theology, right? Rabbi Schulweis talked about predicate theology. Rabbi Schulweis talked less about what God is and more about godly actions, right? God as an adverb. So when you speak, you should speak in a godly way. When you spend money, you should spend money in a godly way. When you parent, you should parent in a godly way. When you study Torah, you should study Torah in a godly way, right? All the ways in which we live, we can bring that godly nature into that. And caring for the dead is one of the ways in which our tradition pinpoints most clearly as something that we do that can very much be godly, right? The Talmud says, just as God consoles mourners, so too should you console mourners. Just as God buries the dead, so too should you bury the dead, right? So this is a very clear action that we take, that we can follow in God's ways. And so in thinking about how these different concepts bounce off each other and interact, I'm thinking about how those liminal elements of life, right? Those times in life when we are very much on the border between one state and another, and that moment of death is, of course, the clearest one of those, in certain, right? In a whole host of different ways. Those liminal moments are the moments in which we are most called to act in godly ways. It is most, in some ways, clear that that's the moment to take that on, and can also be most painful and difficult. And so I'm thinking about the challenge of the body that's hanging there, right? The ethical challenge, the moral challenge, the challenge of action, what's to be done, and then the challenge to us in terms of reflecting that this might be a person who did some reprehensible things. And yet, what is the call to action? What is the call for taking a godly action in that moment in terms of determining what that might be for each of us? Rabbi Schatz, what do you think?
I didn't know if you were thinking or if you're passing it over.
Well, I'm thinking, but you know.
Yeah, I'm struck at how much, when we were first talking about this verse, how much we were kind of stuck on this idea of the person on the stake, and how the more we are talking about this right now, the more that I think about the fact that maybe the point of having this law in the Torah is actually not for us to focus on a person who has been put to death and what happens to them, but more so how we treat others in such a way that if they are in our midst, that we see them still as godly people, no matter what their actions have been, right? There are people in this world who do not necessarily deserve our forgiveness, but still deserve to be seen as made in the image of God, no matter what their consequence is for whatever that reprehensible behavior is. And in Sanhedrin, which I know we've now referred to a few times, so in the Gemara, they actually use a very similar phrase, which is kal alai alma, which is one of the ways that the rabbis talk about things that are difficult is they say them in the opposite, so that you know, which is, by the way, when you're learning Talmud, very hard to pick up on if you don't know that, because sometimes it says something that you think is going to be positive, and then you realize, oh, no, they're saying it positively because it's hard for us to comprehend, because it's so terrible. And so that's what's happening here. Kal alai alma means the world is easy, is light, is full of ease for me. But really what it's saying is that the world is really heavy on me right now. And it's talking about a depressive state. And so the God in this way, Rabbeinu Bachia says that God is actually doing the same thing here. In using the words ki kilelat Elohim, God doesn't want to incriminate God's self. So the Torah phrases this idea as if it was bemoaning its own fate, right? But in reality, we're talking about this pain, this destruction of another human being that is made in God's image. And as Rabbi Shapiro mentioned, that comes up again in the Talmud when we discuss how God feels a person's pain when they are in pain. We are supposed to take care of the dead because God, if God were on the earth, would be doing that as well. And that's part of our role as being made B'Tselem Elohim, is to be God's hands, to be God's mouth, to be God's feet in the world. So right now we are in the middle of working on this Chevra Kadisha. And it is something that every time we go through a training, it reminds me how we are really doing God's work. We are making sure that people, even in their final moments, in the moments where they are no longer aware the community is around them, community is around them. Because we are doing that which God would want to be doing if God were on this earth. So one final thing, and then I'll let Rabbi Shapiro finish us out with some text to then wrap up, This idea of Hi Kilelat Elohim is that, yes, a person did something terrible, but it's also a curse for God to see a person hanging. God feels badly that God's people have done something so terrible that that is now their fate. And we, the people who are not hanging, need to figure out how we treat the person in their state. How do we make sure that that person is dealt with honorably as a person of God? Again, even if they did something terrible, for us to still regard them as having this piece of God in them. And not just the Adonai piece of God, but as the Shema does, bring together, and as Rabbi Schulweis mentions, we need both of those pieces. We need to actually be able to see the relational God in this person to be able to rectify in our justice part of our mind how we deal with a person for whom we might not have as much rachamim, as much compassion, but for whom we still need to see them made in the image of God.
And this also isn't just about those who are looking out in the world. This is also about how we see ourselves. And I'm saying that based on the core rabbinic text that you see over and over again when you look at these verses. Rashi riffs on it, some of the other Mefarshim do as well. It's in the Talmud. In playing with this idea laid out in the verse, the rabbis say this can be compared to two brothers, twins, depending on which version you read. So we'll say twins, right? Two twins. One of them became a king. One of them became an armed robber and was hung. And the challenge that this verse then has is that you shouldn't leave that body up, because chas v'shalom, God forbid that someone would be walking down the street, see the body hanging there, and think that the king has been hung, right? Rather than his twin, the armed robber. In my head, there's this moment. I sort of like fabricate narratives that come up in Midrashim sometimes. So I'm thinking about, the king himself is walking down the street and is confronted, right, with his brother who he sees hanging there. That there's these two nearly identical, if not completely identical men, one of whom is in the most elevated position possible and one of whom's life has found this tragic and violent end. But they're basically the same person. They look the same, come from the same place, raised the same, et cetera, yet one of them has found his way to riches and glory, the other one of whom has found tragedy and violence. And our tradition says, bear in mind how similar those two really are, right? That they come from the same place, that they look the same. And each of them, even and especially the one in this case who has been put to death, is still worthy of the chesed shel emet, the loving kindness that we afford in our tradition to all those who have left this earth. It also calls to mind for me, as we are moving through Elul and Rosh Hashanah draws closer, the idea when it comes to making tshuva, that we should see the entire world as if it is hanging by the balance, exactly even for its merits and for its flaws. And each and every single one of our actions could tilt the balance of the earth one way or the other, calling to us the importance of each and every single action we take as we think about the tshuva that we need to make for this past year and the way in which we want to be living our lives in the year to come. And this image here too resonates for me in that we should not kid ourselves, right? We are not necessarily destined to become king. We are certainly not sentenced to becoming the armed robber. But those two brothers came from the same place. Therefore, each action we take pushes us down one path or another. And just as I was talking about at the beginning of the Torah service, each one of us has fulfilled some mitzvah. Each one of us has transgressed at least one negative commandment, maybe even more than one, right? We each have the capacity to fulfill the mitzvot. We each have the ability to transgress the mitzvot. Each one of us can become royalty. Each one of us can go astray. And so looping that rabbinic interpretation back into the verse, we should make sure to take the body down as soon as we can so that we do not have that klilat Elohim hanging for too long. And we should also be mindful of the holiness within each of us, regardless of the direction we may have gone, so that we can see the inherent holiness, potential for royalty, potential for godly action, in Rabbi Schulweis's words, whatever the situation might be, to remember that we are blessed in this day to have the opportunity to do mitzvot in the world, to take holy actions, to care for those in need, and to bring glory to that which God holds up to us, and to try to walk in God's ways towards community and holiness always. With that in mind, we'll take a few moments for the personal whispered Musaf Amidah. You can find it in the Lev Shalem on page 185, in the Shabbat and Holiday Sim Shalom on 156. Once again, I do not have a full Siddur Sim Shalom with me in this moment, but I can tell you with certainty that it is on page 430. We'll take a few minutes for the Amidah now. Ose shalom bimrama, Ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, imru, amen. Ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. If you're still in the middle of your Amidah, please continue at your own pace. In Kelohenu, page 204 in the Lev Shalem, page 182 in the Shabbat Sim Shalom, and page 508 in the full Sim Shalom. Rabbi Schatz, you want to lead in Kelohenu?
Enke Eloheinu, Enke Adonenu, Enke Malkeinu, Enke Moshienu, Micha Eloheinu, Micha Adonenu, Micha Malkeinu, Micha Moshienu, Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Malkeinu, Nodel Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu Shiktiru, Avotenu, Lefanecha Ketoret Hasamim, Yanai, 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 Yanai.
Beautifully done.
What?
Beautifully done.
Thank you.
Please rise if you are able, page 205, 183, or 510 for Aleinu. Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol atit gdola liyotzer b'shit. Shelo asanu k'gei haratzot v'lo samanu k'mishpachot adama. Shelo sam chelkenu kahem v'gor aleinu kechol hamonam. Anachnu korim mishtachavim umodim. Bifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu. כמלכות שלך היא, ומלאת תמלוך בכבוד, ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני, למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו, Ushemo echad. Mourner's Kaddish can be found on page 207 in the Lev Shalem, page 184 in the Shabbat Sim Shalom, page 512 in the full Sim Shalom. Sir, Rabbi Schatz, can you see if there's anyone on who might want to lead us?
The Bacharach family, Gary and Marlise, are on if they would like to be unmuted. It says Gary and Bacharach on the, there we go. Are they unmuted?
Don't let me. You cannot unmute.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Okay. Sorry. Okay.
Amen.
Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevarach Leolam Olmei Olmaya.
Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevarach Leolam Yitbarach, Yishabach, Yishabhar, Yikaman, Yinaseh, Yitadar, Yitalei, Yitalam, Shmei Kadashah, Baruch Hu. Leila Min Kol Merutat, Shiratat, Tushkeharatat, Venekamantat, Say Shalom B'Maman, Huya say Shalom.
Amen.
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 Amen. Thanks, Marlise. Thanks, Gary. Appreciate you being with us this morning. We're, of course, thinking about you guys and holding you close in our hearts and our thoughts, even if we can't be physically close to you right now. We're thinking about you. We will begin to wrap things up. Adon Olam, 211 Lev Shalem, 187 Shabbat Sim Shalom, 514, or page 6 in the full Sim Shalom. Adon Olam Asher Mahalach B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra Le'nasa B'chefto Kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra Ve'acharei Kichlot HaKol Levado yimloch nora vehu haya vehu hove vehu yeh betifara vehu echad v'ein sheni lehamshilo lehachbira beli reshit beli tachlit velo haoz vehamisra vehu eli vechai goali v'tzurchev li b'yitzhara vehu nisi umanos li Menakosi beomekra ve'ado of kidruchi ve'tishan ve'aira ve'imruchi geviati Adonai li ve'lo ira. Rabbi Schatz, do you have any announcements for us this fine midday?
No, just that tonight we have Mincha Mariv. If people would like, this Zoom will remain on. So if you would like to just keep your Zoom room open, you can join us. I believe it is at 7:10. Last week was 7:20, so I believe it's 7:10 this week. We have Zoom into Shabbat, Zoom out of Shabbat. Oh boy, we have Zoom out of Shabbat with Havdalah.
Where are we going?
Yeah.
Which direction are we going?
At 8:05, and then our LO program continues throughout this week. The email will go out Sunday morning, so you can see all the wonderful things that will be happening. You also now have the schedule for Rosh Hashanah and for Yom Kippur,
Woo!
and you will be receiving it in hard copy as well through the Kol Ha'am. If you have not received those emails, or if you need more clarification, which would be totally understandable, you can email either Rabbi Shapiro or myself. We would be happy to help you, or any of the clergy, but I can't speak for them. I can only speak for Rabbi Shapiro.
Wait a minute.
I think that's it. I think we're ready for Kiddush.
If anyone emails me about high holidays, I will be forwarding the email to Rabbi Schatz.
That's also fine.
Okay, good.
Okay.
I will only add to that, if you have not yet renewed your membership, we are hoping to take care of that before high holidays come in. I know also we are pretty much at the deadline for the Book of Remembrance, memorial book that we compile. So if you would like to add to that, please do so soon. Lots of great programs all throughout this week. Hope everybody gets some rest over Shabbat. And Rabbi Schatz, I believe, check me on this because I still don't have the full Sim Shalom. Was Kiddush on page 734? Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. Excellent. I can't do wine shtick anymore, so I can at least do full Siddur Sim Shalom shtick. I'm doing the best I can over here. It's very lonely in this very large room. Okay. Visham Reuven Yisrael Shabbat L'Sot Shabbat L'Dorotam Brit Olam Beini Uvein B'nei Yisrael Ati L'Olam Ki Sheish Yemim Esad Adonai Shema Vet Aretz Uv'Yom HaShvi Shabbat V'Nefash Zahar Choret Yom HaShabbat L'Kodsho Sheish Yemim Tvol Tesir Kol Maltecha V'Yom HaShvi Shabbat L'Adonai L'Hecha Lo Taseh Kol Melacha Ata Uvincha Uvitcha Udecha V'Amtcha V'Amtcha V'Gercha Asher B'Sharecha Ki Sheish Yemim Esad Adonai Shema Vet Aretz Ata Yavik Kol Shabam V'Yinach V'Yom HaShvi Yalkein Barach Adonai Yom HaShabbat V'Yikadshehu Savri.
Hi.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen.
Amen. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Again, the Zoom room will remain open. So if you're going to join us for Mincha Mariv, you're welcome to just keep this Zoom open on your computer, and we will see you all this afternoon.
Keep on Zooming. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
And Yasher Koach to Marshall and Rick again. Beautiful, beautiful reading.